All right, Tom Moran from Tom's Big Spiders here. As you can see, I have my bag of Lugarti Premium in Gold Tarantula Substrate. Now, I wasn't going to do this for a little while. I've had several people asking me about the Lugarti Substrate, though, and I figured I'd chime in with mine. As most people know, I mix my own substrate. I have my own type of dirt that I like to use with my tarantulas. And I know my buddy Mike over at KC Tarantulas, and I'll go ahead and put a little thing up here in a moment, did a wonderful review on. However, I have my own perspective on this kind of stuff. I actually was contacted recently from another producer of supposed premium substrate and told, hey, we make this stuff, and it didn't turn out well. I'll share that story another time. But I decide, what the heck, I'll pick some up. So I dropped, I think it was close to $13 on Amazon. I do have the Amazon Prime, so I get the free 2-day shipping, which is nice, on essentially what appears to be a very nice bag of dirt. So we'll go ahead. It's 8 dry quarts, which is a decent amount. And I'll read what's on the back. One of the most critical factors in caring for tarantulas in captivity is using the right substrate. The most commonly used substrates in the industry are coco coir and vermiculite. Not vermiculite per se. I know a lot of old hobbyists. I got into the hobby, started dabbling in the hobby in the 90s, and back then vermiculite was the in thing to use for substrate. Everybody would just pour vermiculite down. Then there was a little issue with there being, I believe it was asbestos in the vermiculite, so they pulled it from the market for a while, so a lot of people switched up. There are still some old school keepers that will use 100% vermiculite. I believe Deadly Tarantula Girl is one of the ones that still uses straight vermiculite, and I've talked to other old hobbyists that still use it, but that's a little misleading. Not a lot of people use a lot of vermiculite. In fact, I take some caca sometimes for the fact that I mix vermiculite into mine. I would say coco coir, peat would be another popular one, and topsoil has become very, very popular. So I don't know about that. The problem with these substrates is that they are always either too dry or too wet, and neither of them will hold the proper burrow. Coco coir will hold the burrow, because one thing that people don't realize is when tarantulas do burrow, what they do is they web up the whole interior. But what you get is a fluffy burrow, especially if you're trying to keep a dry species. And that's one of the reasons I started moving away from coco coir. So there's some truth in that. Whether you have a terrestrial or an arboreal species, Lugarti's Premium Tarantula Substrate allows you to simulate a natural habitat and control important humidity parameters per your species' specific requirements. Again, as we talk about with humidity, you shouldn't be going for specific humidity levels, but we'll run with this one. Holds perfect burrows. That's what I've read about this. That's apparently the big important factor, is that it's supposed to hold burrows very, very well. I believe it has some type of clay in it, which when you wet clay down, like excavator's clay I use for my scorpions, when you wet it down, let it dry out, you can actually sculpt it. It holds its shape. Instructions for use: for slings to adults, arboreal and terrestrial species, simply fill the enclosure, vial, container, terrarium, etc., with the depth of 4 to 5 times the height, not length, of your tarantula, and pack down firmly. That's a little too specific there. Normally you wouldn't use the same height for an arboreal as you would a terrestrial, and definitely not the same depth you would use for a burrowing species. So again, some interesting stuff on the back here, and this is my way of thinking of this. If you're going to create something that's supposedly specifically for an animal, you have to know about the animal husbandry. And there's some little things in the back here that make me think that these guys have some general all-around information about tarantulas, but not necessarily, they're not experts at this. I'm going to go out on a limb and say this probably wasn't produced by a keeper or somebody that's been in the hobby for a while, but again, just a guess. So add water to the substrate for species that require higher humidity. That's a good thing. Spot clean and replace as needed. So interesting directions there. What we're going to do in a minute is we're going to cut it. We're going to open it up and see what it looks like and what it smells like, and stick our hands in it, see what it feels like. And then I have a couple things I want to do, little experiments comparing this to what I currently use. And then most important, we're going to talk about the price, because that is a huge factor, I think, for people that have larger collections. So we're going to cut here, go on to some of the fun stuff in a minute. There's some. All right, so now we're going to open this up. This has been tough because I've been waiting to shoot this video, and it's been sitting here for a couple weeks, and I've been dying to open it up. I do like the matte finish on the packaging. That's a huge one for me. Billy and I used to publish some books, and I always like the matte for some of the book covers. So let's open this up. We have a nice, looks like resealable, not very easily opened. Sweet baby. You're French. All right, and actually looks like tobacco. And it pretty much smells exactly like dirt. That's it smells exactly what I use. It does look a lot finer, and it looks like, if it was to guess, it looks like there's a lot more peat mixed up in here from the consistency. It says it's dry. This is actually feeling, I mean, it says dry quartz. Oh, dry quartz, that's the measurement. It's definitely a little damp. Let's dump a little bit of this out in here and see what it looks like. It almost looks like just potting soil. We got some roots, some plants. You think somebody's just selling really nice dirt. All right, so let's just, for giggles, let's pretend like we're doing a burrowing species here. We're down to about half a bag. All right, so it cut out for a second there, but we've just filled this up with a little over half of what was in here. I have a little something else set aside that we're going to use later. So this is probably more than half. One thing I'm noticing about it is it's very fluffy in the bag. So this is supposed to be really good substrate for fossorial species, which means we have to pack it down. So let's see what happens when we pack it. Pack it. It's really spongy. Like really spongy. What does it remind me? It reminds me of sponge cake. Because I squished a lot of sponge cake with my hands. It does pack down well. Like really well, but it does feel spongy. It reminds me a lot of when you pack down wet cocoa fiber. Or even maybe wet peat. I don't know. I'm noticing, looking up close, if you can see, there's little grains of sand, so they must use sand in it, which probably helps with the water irrigation. But it packs down. It packs down well. But good news is it packs down really well. Bad news is this is an enclosure I was going to use for like a 1.5-inch juvenile, and I've already used half of it. So let's keep that in mind later on when we start comparing costs of this to other substrates, because I do think that's going to be a factor. I know it's premium in gold substrate, but I also don't feel like paying the cost of gold for dirt for a tarantula, especially considering how expensive tarantulas are. So we will be looking at that. But I will say the qualities of it, there's not a lot of debris in it like the topsoil that you sometimes get, or even peat. It's very smooth, packs down well. And if we're going to start a burrow, you can almost mold it. It feels like, it feels like Fun Foam. That Nickelodeon crap the kids use. It actually kind of reminds me of Fun Foam. So you can make a nice little pre-started burrow, which is nice. So quality-wise, I do think it's a nice quality dirt, for lack of a better term. They have a nice mixture here. It's very fine. Feels good. I would be curious to see what happens when this dries out. So what we're going to do in a moment is, because one of the things that's not mentioned is this stuff right now is damp. This is something I would use for a tarantula that needed a little bit more damp. I would have to dry this out for my species that don't require damp substrate, and I'm kind of curious as to what it feels like and what its qualities are once it's dry, because a good substrate, you're going to want to be able to use dry and moist. And so far, this feels very nice moist. It's nice. It's very tactile. I like it. But let's see what it looks like dry. So what I'm going to do is take some of it, stick it in the oven, dry it out, and then we're going to examine what it looks like with that. And then we'll also take some of this here and some of my substrate and kind of compare them side by side to see which one has the better qualities, or if there are anything that make one stand out over the other. I will say so far this one's very similar to what I use, just a lot more refined. So far not bad, really nice. I am a little worried. I mean, I will say right off the bat, a little worried about the fact that I've already used half a bag of this stuff. Now I have over 200 animals. It might be a little cost prohibitive. So we'll take a break, come back in a minute after we go ahead and dry some of this stuff out in the oven and see what it's like dry. All right, it's been about 15 minutes or so. What we did is I did my little trick I use with cocoa fiber, because a lot of times with cocoa fiber you have to rehydrate the bricks. It's too wet to use. So I stick it in the oven on low heat for a little while to dry it out. And here, if Billy wants to zoom in, we've got kind of a breakdown of what it looks like dry. Definitely like it better moist. I will say that it's very, it's like powdery and spongy at the same time. Almost feels like a combination, honestly, of peat and cocoa fiber. I've used that before. Now, a couple of years ago, I did a bunch of experiments to try to figure out what combination works best for me. And my son and I basically would take the same amount of water, add it to them, and see what would hold on to the water and whatnot. And it reminds me a lot of my cocoa and peat mix, just very powdery. The other thing I noticed, it seemed to lose a bit of volume once it was dehydrated. So what we're going to do here is pretend like we're setting up a sling enclosure. Go ahead and dump this stuff right on in, and really not a lot left here. see how this works. Because I have to say I'm a little particular with the properties of my soil. I like something that packs down firmly. And again, personal preference. It's not wrong. I have people that see that I don't use the cocoa fiber and immediately panic and think there's something wrong with it. Nothing wrong with it. I use it for years, but I don't like the sponginess of it. And that's what this is reminding of. So there we go. That's dry half quart there, whatever. Actually, was this 2 quart? And again, it packs down well. It does not bad. And I always pack mine down. I see some people leave them fluffy. I've noticed a lot of tarantulas do not like the fluffy substrate. Plus, if I want them to burrow, I want it to hold together. So it does pack down well, but it feels almost exactly like cocoa fiber. And it's very, very spongy. Now, for giggles, let's see how well it rehydrates, because one of the things I will say about topsoil, and one of the reasons I add vermiculite to it, is when topsoil dries out, when you try to add water to it, it becomes like mud. But if you add the vermiculite, it allows the water to absorb down through. So, wow. Actually, honestly, expected that to go. But it's soaking through. It's soaking through. Here we go. Ooh, I actually expected that to be much more absorbent. I don't know. My vermiculite mix might make this. I actually thought it was going to get creamed here, but that's. I mean, and again, this has just been packed down really well, but and it's soaking in. It's soaking in, coming down through the sides, but I actually thought it was going to soak in a little bit better. There it goes. It's going. It's going. So if I were to hold it, if I were to make it rain in an enclosure, it is true. That's actually not that bad at all. For some reason I thought it was just going to suck it right up like a sponge. There we go. Look at it. It's already soaked through. So that's not bad at all. And what I will do is keep an eye on. Oh man, did I just ruin this stuff? No, just throwing it with the other stuff. What I'll do is keep an eye on how long it takes for the top to drop. Because ideally, when you want moist substrate, you want it to stay moist down in here. This encourages burrowing. It allows the tarantula to go down and find the moisture level it needs. You don't want the top to stay all wet. That's just not good. It's not particularly great for the tarantula. And so I want this stuff to percolate down and collect around the bottom, which is why I use the vermiculite in mine as I swat this fly away. So there we go. Just some comments about things I'm thinking about it right now. As far as pros, I will say it has a very nice consistency to it. Excuse me, very fine. It's obviously, they really ground this stuff up really good. Not a lot of chunks in it. It does feel, when it packs down, it does hold a burrow very well, which is great. It also seems to suck water back in after it gets dry very, very well, which is a definite plus. And we'll have to wait and see how well it percolates down to the bottom. Because I will say, if this doesn't make its way all the way down to the bottom, this will dry out very, very quickly from experience. You want those bottom layers to stay moist. And as far as other pros, I mean, it's a nice quality soil, I guess. As far as cons so far, we won't talk about the price yet. We'll get to that. But it is very dry. It's very powdery and springy. I don't think I'd want to use it as much. Like, I like straight dirt for dry species. It just feels better. It's got a nice solid base to it. It is a little springy even when it's wet, which again, the spiders can dig in it. They won't mind, but it's just a personal thing there. So it's definitely got some good qualities. What we're going to do next is we're going to put it head to head with my substrate that I mix up, and then we will talk about the costs of them. But so far, not bad. I'm liking it. As I was commenting to Billy before, this might be something that I would use with slings in smaller quantities, which I think would work really, really well, especially ones you need to keep moist. So that's a good plus. And it's already starting to, look at that. It's already drying up on the top big time. So I'll be curious to see. We'll keep an eye on this and come back and visit this in a couple hours to see what it looks like. But interesting so far. I'm not completely turned off to it. It's a nice substrate so far, but we'll keep going and see where our tests take us. All right, so here we are. We've got a cup of my mix, which is basically a 3-to-1 mix of generic topsoil with vermiculite. You can kind of see some of the vermiculite in there. I can hold it over here. There we go. And mine's not quite as fine as the other stuff. That's one thing I will say about the Lugarti, is that it's got a much nicer consistency. When you get topsoil, there's always little chunks of stuff in, but I kind of like the natural look of it. So I'm going to do the same thing I did earlier. I'm just going to dump some water in, see how it percolates down and sinks in. There it goes. So very, very similar to the other stuff. It's bubbling. I haven't seen that before. So this mixture I started doing because I keep a lot of moisture dependent species, and one of the issues I was having was when I tried to add water to the substrate, it wasn't sinking on down through. And because I use topsoil in particular kind of turns to mud if you don't give it something in there that allows the water to percolate down. So there we go, that sunk down pretty quickly. I'd say very, very similar to the other batch of stuff, to the Lugarti. Looks fairly even. Now this is obviously much more water than I'd normally pour into something this size. It's a little bit swampy right now, but as you can see, all soaked on down through, and more importantly, it went down all the way to the bottom, because ideally what I want when I add water to my substrate is I want it to percolate through, and I want the top to dry out a little bit so that the tarantulas aren't sitting in a swampy mess. I have no problem with the top drying out. And most of my enclosures, I can tell when I need to add water to the substrate, because you'll see the line of dry substrate along the bottom. When it starts getting too deep, then I will add substrate. It also encourages burrowing, because the spider can basically burrow to the humidity level or the moisture level that it needs. So there we go. There's mine. As you can see, mine works just as well as the other stuff, and we'll get into the price of mine later. I will say that Lugarti's much finer, and mine holds on to the stuff very, very well, so we'll have to see how well the Lugarti's holds on to the moisture. That's the one thing I like about mine, is that I just rehoused a spider the other day, and I thought the enclosure was dried out, and I got down to the bottom, and the bottom levels were all still nice and moist, and it had been a while since I had added water. So there we go. There's the Tom's Big Spiders mix, we'll call it, with vermiculite and topsoil, 3-to-1. Topsoil, 2 vermiculite. Did really, really well. So we'll check the Lugarti in a little while and see how it held on to the moisture. So here we are back a week and a half, actually might be 2 or 3 weeks later. Has it been a month? It might even be a month since I got the Lugarti's and started to do my little experiment. And here was the cup of moist Lugarti's I put in. And I just want to show, although the top has dried out quite a bit, the bottom is still fairly moist. There we go, right in there. Yeah. It's still got some moisture to it. So this stuff really does hold moisture very, very, I mean, that's still, you can't see it, but it's moist to the touch. And this has been basically sitting completely open. There's been no cover on it in my tarantula room, which has been very hot because the heat's been running lately, because it's been cold. So most of the stuff should have evaporated out of it, yet it's holding on to it. So this stuff really does hold moisture really well. Unfortunately, that can be a pro or a con. I decided to use some of the Lugarti's to set up some of my slings, because I think that where this stuff is really going to shine is when you're setting up slings. One of the biggest issues with raising smaller slings is you have to keep the substrate moist. And I will admit that my mixture of dirt, which is over here, which is a mixture of topsoil and vermiculite, can be a little bit chunky, which makes it harder to pour in the water evenly, not drown a sling in the process. And what I like about this stuff is it really just absorbs water very quickly and holds it. However, the fact that it holds water so well means it doesn't dry out well. So I want to set up some of my slings here. Here I have my bee Bamie, which I wanted a moist spot, and she's hiding over there. She's in pre-molt. But I wanted a moist spot. So what I did was kind of made like the Neapolitan ice cream thing here, where I put the Lugarti's over here, some of my drier stuff over here, so it has a choice. This will be the part that I'm moistening down, because the stuff absorbs water really, really well. Over here, I did have my Peace Sasme, which they can actually do very well with moisture sub. I'm going to let some of this dry out, but you can see here it holds the substrate very well. I mean, the moisture very well. This is actually some of the old substrate here. And again, it's just, I really like it for slings, and I think something like this size would obviously fill up quite a few sling enclosures, especially if you're using the 16-ounce variety, very, very well. Unfortunately, they advertise it for burrowing species and such, and I think that's where it might become a little bit cost prohibitive. While doing some of the math this year, I used 4 bags of topsoil, and we're going to put a little graphic up here, and 1 bag of vermiculite, which was basically 4 cubic feet. So a huge bag of vermiculite. I actually still have some left, but let's just pretend like I used it all up. So we have about 7 cubic feet, which is about 179 dry quarts. To get the equivalent of that in the Lugarti's, I would have to buy 21 bags of this. And that's when things start getting very cost prohibitive, at least for somebody like me who has a very large collection. I have over 200 animals in my collection, a lot of deep animals that require deep substrate, and I would use up a ton of this stuff. So for what cost me about $46 total to get the 4 bags of topsoil and 1 bag of vermiculite, so $46 with tax, would be about $267.75 for the Lugartis, and that's using Amazon with the free shipping. If you go on the Lugarti website, it's going to cost you quite a bit more with the shipping. So that's a lot of money for, you could subtract what I got my stuff for from that cost and still be able to put in a really nice order for slings somewhere else. However, this stuff works really, really well. So the question is going to be up to the individual keeper whether or not it's worth that kind of money. I like the properties of it. For moisture-dependent species, it would be great. It's just going to cost you an arm and a leg to put basically dirt in your enclosures. All right, so final thoughts on the Lugarti Premium Tarantula Substrate. I gotta admit, it's good. It's good stuff. It works very, very well for holding in moisture. It absorbs water very well, which is an issue with some of the other substrates. I will say that I can mix something up with my topsoil and vermiculite that's very comparable. But just for an out-of-the-bag substrate, the stuff really is, it's premium Tarantula Substrate. I guess it works really well. Personally, I will continue to use it for slings and things that require a smaller amount because it's going to be very cost prohibitive, I think, for people with larger collections. This is only 8 dry quarts. Some of my enclosures would take 3 or 4 bags for just one enclosure for some of my burrowing species, and that's just too much money to pay. Is it worth it? For me, probably not. For people that have smaller collections, or for people that just don't mind spending extra money for it, maybe they do find it's worth it. I think the value can be determined by each individual keeper. But for larger collections, I would say this would be a little bit cost prohibitive. For smaller collections, this might be something you can keep a few bags on hand. I mean, it's easily packaged, it's sealed right back up, it's very convenient. Or I'm going to continue to use it for things like slings. I think I will be using this for all my slings now because I like how it holds the moisture, and I have a hard time sometimes, even with my mix, it's a little chunkier, getting that water to percolate down evenly and keep it moist, especially during the winter. And I think this stuff would be great for that. For some of my scorpions that require a little moisture, this would be good. And I'm thinking in terms of my centipedes that I just got. I keep spanking this thing. I gotta find something else to do with my hand here. I think with my centipedes that also require moist sub, I found that it's a little more difficult to keep it moist. I'm probably going to switch them out. I'm going to get them nicer enclosures and use some of this. So I will continue to use it. I think that's the best vote of confidence I can give it. This is something I will be picking up more of. I have some slings I have to transfer coming up, and I will be using this. And I encourage people, for $11, especially if you have Amazon with the 2-day shipping, it's worth it to check some of it out and try it for yourself. So I think some of the positive reviews have been warranted. Again, I just worry about the cost overall for larger collections. So again, Premium Tarantula Substrate by Lugarti. I like it. It's good. A little expensive for my taste, but it's definitely something I will continue to use. And if you've used it and enjoy it, please feel free to comment about it because it'd be kind of neat for other people to hear what other keepers think about it. I think I'm probably done talking about dirt for today. This is not going to be one of my more thrilling videos, I don't think. So if you like this video, please feel free to check out some other ones. I don't know if Billy's got me framed out well, but usually they come right in here. And if you enjoyed it enough to subscribe to my channel, I will probably put the little Tom's Big Spiders thing up here, right? Or here. We'll see. We'll switch it up. Maybe I can make it bounce back and forth. I don't know if I can do that. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.